Welcome friends, local Florida gal here. Today I'm at Merritt Island in the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. This is so exciting. It is my first time here. Huge thanks to Kennedy Space Center for having me out. I can't wait to explore everything that this place has to offer. I have got my map, I've got my itinerary, so come and join me in the fun. This is really cool. It says here that the Astrorad vest is the first protective gear designed to shield astronauts from radiation during solar storms. The Aerojet Rocketdyne RL-10 upper stage engine has flown hundreds of missions over the past 50 plus years to place satellites into orbit and send spacecraft to explore deep space. A Boeing blue spacesuit like this one will be worn by all crew members who fly aboard the company's CST-100 Starliner spacecraft.
Located 1,500 light years away in the constellation Orion. This is the Horsehead Nebula, first discovered in 1888. The distinctive dark horsehead shape of the nebula is a cloud of dust that blocks the light of the glowing nebula behind it. Dusty nebula clouds like this one are often called stellar nurseries because they're where new stars are born. There's one now, a protostar, the first step in a star's life cycle. Once a protostar reaches a stable state, it becomes a main sequence star and will continue in that phase for millions to tens of billions of years. So we've seen a star's birth. Now let's take a look at a dying star. Discovered in 1731 and most famously photographed by Hubble in 1999. We're so far away from Earth, the light we're seeing now won't reach home until after the year 8500. When a star about 8 times as massive as our sun dies, it goes out with a bang in a violent explosion called a supernova. And these beautiful celestial clouds are what's left behind. We've saved something special for last, a Wolf Rayet star, a rare and beautiful type of star nearing the end of its life cycle and about to go supernova. At 1,000,000 times brighter than our sun, this star emits stellar wind approaching 100,000 miles per hour. Its ejection shell is so large, our entire solar system could fit across it end to end over 2,000 times. When Wolf Rayet stars explode in a supernova, they see the universe with the heavy elements that make up planets, stars, and even our own bodies. From the fiery crucible of this star's death come the building blocks of future worlds. But now, we make the 28,000 light-year journey back to one of the most beautiful sights of all. Earth basks in the glow of our own star, the sun. It's the energy source that sustains nearly all life on our planet.
Fiat Mission Control. Welcome back. Your approach is free of arriving traffic. Cleared for landing on runway 31. Fiat copy.
We are about to start our tour of the Rocket Garden. If you can hear the sound of my voice and would like to join us, we are meeting at the front entrance to the Rocket Garden. For those of you already here, welcome. My name is Richard Castellanos. I'm a communicator here with the Kennedy Space Center, and I represent NASA. So, let's start walking into the garden. And as we do that, let me answer the number one question that many people have when they come in here. Are these rockets real? Yes, these are real rockets, with one exception. The silver one on my left with the 109T at the bottom, that one is a model. All of the rest of these are real rockets. Did these rockets ever fly? No, they did not. If they'd flown, they wouldn't be here today. These are leftover rockets that could have flown. The other thing to know about most of the rockets here in the garden is that they were originally military missiles, and we converted them for use into the space program. So we're going to walk up here just a few more steps. And I think this is a pretty good spot to get started. So as you're walking up, I want to take you back in time to the year 1957. During the 1950s, we were involved in a Cold War with the Soviet Union. We disagreed with them philosophically, and we were competing with them militarily. So imagine our surprise. We woke up one morning in October 1957, and discovered that the Soviet Union had launched a satellite into orbit around the Earth. No one had ever done that before. That satellite was called Sputnik. It was about the size of a beach ball, and it went beep, 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 beep as it orbited the Earth. Well, we knew we had to respond to that, and in January 1958, we launched our first American satellite into orbit. That satellite was called Explorer 1. It launched on a rocket just like the one over here, the rocket with the letters UE on it. This is the Juno 1 rocket. If you look way at the top, the thing that looks like a big white crayon, that's where the satellite was located. This particular satellite had a hydrocarbon built into it. There was a theory at the time that the Earth is surrounded by bands of radiation. A gentleman named Dr. James Van Allen, one of the proponents of that theory, helped to design the satellite. That Juno 1 rocket lifted off. We put the satellite into orbit, and we did prove that those radiation bands exist. Today, they are known as the Van Allen belts. Well, we wanted to launch bigger payloads that would fit on Juno 1, so we turned to a rocket just like the white one here that has NASA written on it. This is the Juno 2 rocket. We had some early problems with Juno 2. One of its first successes is the flight of a probe called Pioneer 4. Pioneer 4 was designed to fly to the moon and take pictures of the moon. Yeah, we didn't get quite as close to the moon as we hoped we would. We missed it by about 37,000 miles. And we were still learning how to do this stuff. Another rocket we use to launch Earth satellites is the one just like the one behind us here, kind of looks like a big Q-tip way at the top. This is the Thor Delta rocket. Thor Delta was instrumental in launching our first communication and weather satellites. The very first of those communication satellites was a big silver bipolar balloon called Echo. And one of the most famous communication satellites at the time was called Telestar. Telestar was a very popular function. For that, there was a British rock group who wrote a song called Telestar, named after the satellite. Now, it was great. We were learning all these new skills, getting a lot of good information by launching satellites into the orbit. But we wanted to put a person in space. We recruited military test pilots. We selected 7 of the best and the brightest to become our first astronauts in what was called Project Mercury. These guys were really competitive. They competed with each other in lots of different ways because each one of them thought that he was going to be the first person in space. As it turned out, they were all wrong. Because in April 1961, the Soviet Union launched Yuri Gagarin into orbit. He was the first person in space. He did one orbit of the Earth, and we had egg on our faces again. We were still running behind in what was becoming known as the space race. Less than 1 month later, May 5th, 1961, we did launch our first American astronaut into space. His name was Alan Shepard. He launched on top of a Mercury redstone rock. Just like the one back here with the red United States, the black and white stripes, and that black bell-shaped capsule was the Mercury capsule. It held 1 astronaut. Shepard's flight went up 116 miles, arced over the Atlantic Ocean, splashed down in the Atlantic near the Bahamas. Total flight time was about 15 minutes. Just 20 days later, President Kennedy issued a challenge. He said, "We are going to send a man to the moon and return him safely by the end of the decade."
Well, NASA's response to that challenge went something like, "Say what? We've had a grand total of 15 minutes experience in space. We've flown all the way to the Bahamas, and now you want us to go to the moon?" But they did accept the challenge. We had one more manned mission on the Mercury Redstone rocket, but we really wanted to put an American into orbit around the Earth. And to do that, we needed a bigger rocket. We turned to the Atlas rocket, just like the silver with the black United States, and again, we'll see a Mercury capsule at the top. Atlas was originally built as our first intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM. So again, we converted the uses in the space program. And in February 1962, John Glenn became the most famous man in the Western world. He became the first American to orbit the Earth. He did 3 Earth orbits, had a very successful mission. We had 3 more manned missions on the Mercury Atlas rocket, and by the end of Project Mercury, we had proved that man could exist in space. We discovered our eyes weren't going out, the blood wasn't going to boil. We learned that we could eat and sleep in space. But if we were going to get to the moon and back, we also had to learn how to work in space. We moved to Project Gemini. The Gemini capsule held 2 astronauts. You look over here, see this silver rocket flying like space at the bottom? This is the Titan II rocket. Again, originally built as an intercontinental ballistic missile, but if you look way at the top of this one, that rocket thing out there is a Gemini capsule. We also have another rocket, the Gemini capsule, on the ground over here. You can check that out a little bit later. We had a number of firsts that were part of the Gemini program. We had the first American spacewalker, Ed White with Gemini 4. We had our first rendezvous in space, where there were 2 Gemini capsules in orbit at the same time, Gemini 6 and 7. Now, those 2 capsules never physically touched, but they got so close to each other that the 2 crews could see each other out of the windows of their respective capsules. Speaking of Gemini 7, it was at that point in time the longest duration American spaceflight. Gemini 7 was in orbit for 14 days. Now, I want you to take another look at our capsule right at the top of that rocket. I want you to imagine sitting next to someone else in that amount of space for 14 days. Yeah, you can't stand up during that time. You have to work with that person, sleep with that person, eat with that person. At Saturn. You all know what the Saturn is. Anybody here think they can do that for 14 days? You do? You might be our next astronaut. You didn't see my hand raised. These guys were tough. So by the end of Project Gemini, that took place in 1965 and 66, we were excited. We were ready to go. We said, hey, we learned all these new skills, now let's go to the moon. We moved to Project Apollo. And if you follow me, I'll tell you the rest of that story. The Apollo capsule was designed to have 3 astronauts. Get into space, we needed a bigger rocket. We returned to the Saturn 1B rocket, just like it was in the line on the side. The Saturn 1B is one of the 2 rockets in the back, but it was not originally a military missile. The Saturn 1B was built specifically for human spaceflight. In January 1967, the 3 Apollo 1 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Kennedy, were doing a dress rehearsal of their launch. They were inside the capsule on top of the rocket out on the launch pad. Inside that capsule, 2 wires sparked, causing a flash fire that filled the capsule. And unfortunately, we lost all 3 astronauts. That was a tragedy. But at the same time, it was a wake-up call for NASA. They pulled back. They totally re-examined the Apollo capsule, made over 1,300 changes to it. And a little less than 2 years later, October 1968, NASA launched Apollo 7 in the orbit around the Earth on a Saturn 1B rocket, just like the one we see here. But to get to the moon, we needed an even bigger rocket yet. We turned to the Saturn V. Now, we don't have a Saturn V rocket here in the garden. If you take our bus tour a bit later today, we're going to drop you off at the Apollo Saturn V Center, where you will see a real Saturn V rocket. And trust me, it is huge. How big is it? Well, see the length of the Saturn 1B rocket lying on the side? Almost doubled. So in December 1968, NASA launched Apollo 8. We sent 3 astronauts to the moon, put them in orbit around the moon. On Christmas Eve, we sent back a very moving photograph of the lunar landscape with the Earth rising in the background. Very dramatic photo sent to the entire planet. We followed Apollo 8 with Apollo 9, 10, then July 1969, we did land our first man on the moon with Apollo 11. All right, let's do a quick quiz. Who can tell me the name of the first person to set foot on the moon? Just shout it out if you know.
Neil Armstrong.
Neil Armstrong, exactly. Now, how about the second person to set foot on the moon? Who?
Buzz Aldrin.
Buzz Aldrin, not Buzz Lightyear. Don't confuse those two. So we have had 6-man moon landings. Only 12 people have ever walked on the moon. They all launched from right here at the Kennedy Space Center. Apollo 17 was our last moon landing, but it was not the end of the Apollo program. From there, we moved to Project Skylab. Skylab was our first attempt at working with a space station. We had several Skylab missions. We went back to using the Saturn 1B rocket to get our astronauts up to Skylab. The longest of those missions was 84 days in duration. So we did prove that man could stay in space for an extended period of time. The very last Apollo mission had a special significance. In 1975, we launched 3 American astronauts into orbit around the Earth, and at the same time, the Soviet Union launched 2 Soviet cosmonauts into orbit in their Soyuz capsule. Well, those 2 capsules rendezvoused, they physically docked, 2 hatches opened, an American astronaut and Soviet cosmonaut reached out and shook hands in space. So, to bring all this full circle, we went from the 1950s, when we were in total competition with the Soviet Union, to the mid-70s, where, at least in the arena of spaceflight, we were moving to more of an era of cooperation. Now, we've built other rockets since then. That's a segue to introduce the newest rocket here in the garden, the big blue Delta II rocket that you see over here. We never launched astronauts on a Delta II, but this was a workhorse rocket for NASA and the military. It flew 155 missions over a nearly 30-year lifespan. The earliest rovers that we sent to Mars, Sojourner, Spirit, Opportunity, and Phoenix Lander all launched on a Delta II rocket. We sent a mission to an asteroid, a mission to a comet, and most of the GPS satellites orbiting the Earth today, you all use GPS on your cell phones, they launched on a Delta II. The very last Delta II mission launched just under 7.5 years ago. So we welcome the Delta II into our family of rockets here in the garden. And with that, that does end our rocket garden tour. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, I'm going to stick around for a minute. Again, my name is Richard. Please enjoy the rest of your day here at the Kennedy Space Center. Thank you so much for being with us today. Hello, Adam.
Guys, we got like a little bit under 2 minutes. Let's see what this does to us. It's a testing simulator, but it's safe. I'm exactly in the middle, and I can see the lights turn on, and it's feeling a little warm.
Oh, something's going on.
Uh-oh, it's shaking.
I don't think it's going to be water. Well, there was water here. I think it's going to be dry ice.
The group of us that are here, we're all anticipating to see what happens.
No, but you're right over my phone.
Uh-oh. Sorry.
How much longer? Oh, it's doing something.
The lights disappeared.
It's moving.
It's shaking and shaking. It's moving.
Woo! Here we go.
Pretty anticlimactic.
And that was it. Just a bunch of winds.
Terrific.
On launch day, this Friday is the hub of excitement because the team is focused, and the closer you get to T0, the quieter it gets. You can almost feel the concentration in the room.
Now, this room, of course, is very interesting. You can see from the outside that the windows are very large and they're slanted. It has an operational purpose, but it does provide quite a view of the wildlife out there.
It certainly does. But the windows are like this by design, and as you can see, as you look out the windows, what a great view you have of Launch Complex 39A and 39B. And so during the Artemis launches, you can look out to 39B and visual response, and you can see from the core stage engine.
Dream about flying through space. Every week on TV, I'd watch my heroes jump into their rocket ships and get to the stars. And I wanted to be like them. They had courage, imagination, and and no problem ever stood in their way for long. You know, in the end, when we actually did send men into space, it turned out that those were exactly the qualities it took. I'm John Hudson. This is Pad 39 of the Kennedy Space Center. I was a launch controller here when from this very spot, man took off to fly to the moon. It was a journey that began 12 years before that rocket ever left the ground. And it started on the other side of the world. Back then, we were one of two superpowers that always seemed to be on the edge of a terrible war. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first ever man-made satellite into Earth orbit. They called it Sputnik, which means traveling companion. And in a world where peace hung in a delicate balance, it seemed to create a dangerous advantage. Every ham radio operator in America could hear it beeping. People were afraid. Were the Soviets looking down on us? Watching us? If they could make a satellite pass over our cities, could they do the same with a bomb? Our own space program kicked into high gear, and less than 2 months later, we were ready to launch our own satellite. The space race, and we were running a distant second. In 1961, we fell even further behind. Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man into space, circling the world in just 89 minutes. We had our own astronauts, and they were eager and ready to take the big ride. But our manned space program couldn't seem to get off the ground. We stuck with it, and on May 5th, 1961, things finally started going right. Astronaut Alan Shepard took his ship Freedom 7 6.5 miles into space. America had its first space hero. Just a few days later, our space program received a new challenge. But this one did not come from the Soviet Union. It came from our young president. In one inspiring moment, he changed the mission from one based in fear of the present to one of hope for the future.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantis? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. In this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
We hadn't been more than 16 minutes into space, and now we were going to the moon. We would have to design a rocket the size of a 36-story office building, put it together with the precision of a microscope, and accelerate it to the speed of a bullet. Then we would have to guide it to a moving target 250,000 miles away. Many people thought it was an impossible dream, but 400,000 of us set about making that dream a reality. It would be the longest, most hazardous voyage that any man had dared to attempt. But step by step, mission by mission, we orbited the Earth, perfecting the skills and technologies we would need on this incredible journey. Our astronauts practiced maneuvering, docking, and the 1,000 other tasks that would comprise the moon mission. We created new alloys, lighter and stronger than anything seen before. We designed communication systems that would be reliable over the vast distances. And behind it all, we tried to perfect the rocket that would be powerful enough to punch out of Earth orbit and take us to the moon. One day, however, the dream of flying to the moon almost slipped away. It was January 27th, 1967. Astronauts Virgil Gus Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee were on board Apollo 1 for a plugs-out test, a full-scale dress rehearsal for the actual launch. Suddenly it happened. There was a fire in the capsule. 3 men whose lives had been in our hands were lost.
Surely the opening vistas of space promise high costs and hardships, as well as high reward. But this country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them.
After Apollo 1, some thought we'd failed, and that the moon was out of our reach. But we owed it to those men, to learn from their sacrifice, and to carry on. We started taking the Apollo vehicle apart, piece by piece. Was the design flawed? Had safety been compromised? Tough questions. And we spent 1.5 years redesigning the spacecraft so that no astronaut's life would ever be at risk because we overlooked something, or because we could have done something better. A moon rocket is 91% high explosive, and it goes into the most unforgiving, hazardous environment there is. We could never make it risk-free, and the men who flew them knew that. We didn't send men into space again until Apollo 7 orbited the Earth testing some of the new designs. When everything worked perfectly, the decision was made. The next mission would travel to the moon. It was mankind's destiny to leave the shores of our planet behind and strike out across the vast ocean of space. In the great span of our history, now is the time that we could. Now is the time that we would. We stood on the eve of the longest, most dangerous journey that any man had ever undertaken. And it would be taken by Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders, the crew of Apollo 8. Through those doors, you'll find the firing room, launch control, just as it was on December 21st, 1968. The firing room, launch control for the Apollo mission. This is not a mock-up. These are the very consoles we sat at when men first took off to fly to the moon. The tragedy of Apollo 1 had put us 1.5 years behind. We were making up for it in one big leap, and we were doing it with a rocket that no man had ever flown before. It was a few days before Christmas 1968 when Apollo 8 sat on the pad. She was the first of a new kind, a moon rocket. This was the Phoenix, risen from the ashes of Apollo 1. The first Apollo crew did not die in vain. This was to be their testament. "36 stories high, she had been fully fueled throughout the night. The liquid oxygen in her tanks caused ice to form on the outside of the craft. The extreme temperature differences between the air and the sub-zero fuel caused the metal skin of the rocket to expand and contract. Everyone who was on the pad agreed. It was as though the rocket was alive, breathing, straining at the leash. Earlier in the morning, astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders had made their final preparations before taking that long ride out to the waiting spacecraft. The minimum safe distance from a Saturn V at liftoff was 3 miles. The reason was simple. When fully fueled, the rocket contained the explosive power of an atomic bomb. As the clock counted down, the astronauts, and all of us in launch control, went through the pre-flight checks. Our hands on the controls of the most powerful, most complex machine ever built. It had over 2 million separate systems, and to bring these men back alive, everything had to work perfectly. Each individual system had been tested, but what we didn't know was how they would perform when all 2 million began to work together. the miles of wiring, circuits, relays, or valves was defective, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders would pay with their lives. As they sat, waiting for launch on that chill December morning, these three astronauts were back to what they had always been, test pilots. You are now in the final minutes before the launch of Apollo 8, right here where it actually happened. Mankind is about to leave his planet behind and journey to another. It is one of those rare moments when history is not being made, destiny is being embraced.
T-minus 3 minutes and counting. We've completed our communications checks with the Apollo 8 astronauts in the cabin, and the communications are go. During this period, once we do get the firing command, the various tanks within the 3 stages of the Saturn V launch vehicle begin to pressurize. We have firing command. The firing command is in. We are now on the automatic sequence. T-minus 2 minutes, 20 seconds, and counting. Our status board indicates that all aspects are ready. Instrument unit is ready. Spacecraft ready. Final check of the emergency detection system. That ready light also on. First stage preparations are completed.
All systems remain okay. Okay, now going. And we're on. Ready to go to Conway. Stand by, Walter. Okay, you're on.
All systems go. 1 minute 45 seconds and counting. The first stage upper oxygen tank has been pressurized, and the pressure is still building up. Coming up at 90 seconds, mark T-minus 90 seconds and counting. The Apollo 8 crew standing by.
successfully orbited the moon, and the astronauts returned safely to the Earth. I know. I'm Jim Lovell, and I was one of the crew of this spacecraft, Apollo 8. We were the first men to see the surface of the moon from just a few miles away. But it was the hundreds of thousands of men and women who worked that team, and the millions of people who supported the mission that really made it possible. That way, I guess, we all went to the moon. Now, on the other side of those doors, you'll find an actual Saturn V moon rocket. It's still the most powerful, the most complex machine ever built. And I guess it's the only one that could take you to another planet. I actually got to fly one on the second flight to the moon called Apollo 13. But that's another story.
This is all time.
Era esta, estoy seguro que esto se va, porque son distintos motores.
Please proceed to the nose end of the Saturn V rocket. Thank you.
Well, friends, that is going to do it for today. Huge thanks to Kennedy Space Center for having me out. I had a fantastic time. There was a lot of things that I was able to do. A few things I wasn't able to experience because of the time duration. It does close at 5. Definitely want to come back and do a second, maybe a third video. And I also want to showcase all the food options available throughout the visitor complex. So all in all, I had a great time. Local Florida gal. Have a magical day.